Today is the third day of the November 89 7-day retreat in Springwater. I've written down many questions. And it's hard to know where to start. Recently, in Germany, in a retreat, at one point, there were lots of questions, so not being able to decide which one to start, I just read them all. And I received interesting reactions afterwards. The two extremes, if one can put it that way, were one person saying, "That was the most confusing thing you've ever done. Reading all of these questions, it really threw me out of a state of quiet centeredness." And someone else said it was marvelous to hear all of these questions, to really share this mind. Which is operating in all of us. The first one that comes to mind right now is concerning questions. Several people say, sometimes in the solarium, I try to think of a good question, and not being able to find one, there's a certain anxiety. Heart starts pounding. I don't have a good question. One doesn't have to have a good question coming to a meeting. And we looked at that together with a question. This ancient urge to do something good or right or to please the teacher, to be approved of by having a good question or profound question, one that she really seems to get into and like. It's not called for. If you wish to come to a meeting and not say anything, then we'll just sit together. Listen to the rain or the wind, a dog barking, or nothing special. Maybe a question will occur to me and I may ask it or not, or a question will occur to you. So not to make a problem out of this. Even though questions are brought up here, doesn't mean one has to contribute to that. And one isn't a good participant if one isn't a good contributor. We have all of these notions. To listen or sit quietly listening. I can't evaluate these different ways. They're not to be evaluated. And one person said, you know, when I sit, I just sit. I don't have questions. I just sit with whatever comes up. That's the important thing to me, the primary thing. Having a question is secondary. I hope I wasn't conveying yesterday in talking about questioning that one has to, in Springwater, sit with a question. But the mind may formulate that very quickly because we do want to have formulations about what we're doing or what people are doing here. And since I do talk a lot about questioning, then this becomes the thing that is done here, and one feels one is either with the mainstream or aside from the mainstream if one does or doesn't do it. I tried to convey a very broad meaning of the word questioning, and included it that in this very broad meaning is sitting, just sitting without knowing what something is. Because if we immediately know what something is, label it, recognize it, label it, have associations with it, what this reminds me of, or react to it, this is good or this is bad, which all comes with knowing something, with labeling something, then the mind is in a state of knowing, not in this openness of not knowing what something is. If we don't immediately know or realize that the word we have given to it may not be what this really is, anger, fear, or whatever may come up, or nothingness, or boredom. One realizes the word isn't what is going on right now. What is going on right now is not a word. And just sitting, not knowing. Then whatever is there has freedom to reveal itself. It's not pegged or put into a drawer or a compartment by the brain, which is compartmentalizing and categorizing by habit, by century, thousands of old habit. So sitting, not knowing what something is, I can also call questioning, meaning, I don't know, and therefore let it reveal itself for what it is. I don't know what it is. But if one says, look, this is stretching the word questioning too far, I don't call it that, then one doesn't have to. I need some words to communicate, but they're not fixed. They needn't be fixed because the words we're using are only words. What they're describing is something else. What is that? Two questions about perception. One was, is there a perception without the senses operating? In the night of the retreat, the opening talk of the retreat, I said something like, can one listen without listening? I don't know whether that is what brought the question about. Is there a perception without the senses operating? And another question was, or thing we discussed, topic. You were talking about the difference between thought, thinking about something, and the directness of perception. And I can see the difference. This person, I can see the difference. Probably anybody can see the difference between thinking about something and the real thing that one is thinking about. But I have a feeling, the person said, you're talking about something more. Are you talking about something more than this very obvious difference between thinking about something and the real thing that is being thought about. Let's come back to the first question, whether there is perception without the senses operating. If there is, I don't know anything about it. I have no experience with that. So I can't say yes or no. All I can say is that in perception, the way it is taking place this moment, the senses are awake and active. They're operating. And they are not separate from each other. Because there is no labeling or reactive movement that says, this I like, this I don't like, I want to hear this, but I don't want to hear that. There is an openness of receiving, if you wish that word, like that word, in which the sight, hearing, sense of touch is awake, it's there, and yet it's not separate senses. I think we think our way into the separateness of senses. In school we learn what all the different senses are, this and this and this, and with this is already the implication that they're separate things, which our school learning brings about to a great extent by listing the 5 such and such or the 8 such and such, all separate things. And of course, thought is a separate thing, or thought separates. By saying this is this and this is that, they're 2 separate things. It creates sets of things. And then so easily is assumed that this is how the world really is, as thought outlines it, makes it clear to itself. It has limits in that. And yet the very listening need not be separate from the seeing, and vice versa, or the touching. And when a thought comes up, this is seeing, that need not separate if it is perceived in the wholeness of perception as a thought coming up. And if the thought triggers a feeling, that also can be seen as part of this whole stream of perception, feeling, sensing, emoting. In saying, can one listen without listening, what was being expressed or attempted to express is a state of open listening in which there's no effort to hear something. A state of seeing which no effort to look at something or look for something. Just open. Without this added effort of the me needing or feeling compelled to achieve something or to do something right, make an effort. And it is this, the operation of this very structure in us. It's a thought, memory, past experience, and associated feeling structure, which we call me. It's the operation of that which divides up what is seen or which fragments what is heard. Because when this me is in operation, and we will say much more about the me maybe at another time. Right now we'll just use it and bring up questions about it to clarify it in meeting. We have lots of meeting times to look into things one-on-one, as it's said these days, where we can be very particular with one person's urge to clarify or to question. So when this self-structure, the me, which is always wanting or compelled to do something from past programming, when that's in operation, then the seeing or hearing is very limited. Because one sees in terms of what one wants to see, and hears in terms of what one wants to hear. Sees a person in terms of what one wants of that person, or what one doesn't want in that person. This me structure operating in our looking around or listening fragments what is seen according to its own preferences, according to its fears, its habits, its wants, its wanting advantage, and seeing things in terms of, is this to my advantage or not? Is this going to be helpful to me, or something to be pleasurable to me? Or the opposite, will it hurt me, or bring displeasure or threat? So when the me is in operation, which it is most of the time, the world around us, the people around us are sort of scanned with a point of view, a vantage point. What will it do for me? We don't spell this all out, but it happens habitually. And people report this in a retreat, maybe at the beginning, feeling quite threatened by people, very critical of people, according to one's expectations, based on the past, that people may hurt one or take advantage of one, or compete with one, be better than one. And then often in the course of a retreat, or toward the end of a retreat, people say, I feel so much closer to everyone here. I wonder why. I feel sort of a closeness, a share, a commonness with others. And that may happen precisely because the me is quieting down with its fears and wants, feeling threatened, or its aggressions. Quieting down, and what is around, people and things and trees, sky, appear as they are. Not as they are for me, but as they are. And then one may, for the first time, see someone or see something holy. Holy meaning undivided by my preference or fear, or undistorted by my preference or fear, by my wants or anxieties. So, coming back to the question, I don't know whether we have said enough about it, is I can see the difference between thinking about something and seeing it directly, but do you mean something more than the obvious difference? But one must be very careful about this obvious difference, because it is very clear to the intellect that thought about something is different than the very something, different from the very something that one is thinking about. That can be intellectually as clear as daylight. But is one in direct touch with this fact? Which means, can one be, and the language is dualistic, but we won't hang ourselves up on that for the moment. Can one be in the presence of something completely without thinking about it? And without thinking about oneself being in the presence of this, so that there's just this. That's an enormous thing. Enormous, because we're not trained in this, it's not talked about. There's no facet of education about that. There's something relegated to some obscure mystics who may have had some experiences in the Middle Ages or in a foreign country, or maybe in a monastery or in a strict setting of doing meditation. I was on the plane back from Germany. I was sitting next to a professor, an engineering professor of MIT, who must be a very well sought after man, because he told me he's traveling practically every weekend to another country or another spot in the United States for conferences on a very hot topic in engineering. It was nice to talk to, because he with great enthusiasm was telling me about his conferences and meetings with people. And at one point he said, "What are you doing?" And it's never easy, particularly not when an engineering professor asks you that. And one sort of starts stuttering around. I don't even remember what I said. He brushed it aside. Not disdainfully, but it didn't resonate with anything, which is quite understandable. So we went back to his conferences. Also talked about politics. We sort of agreed. So, not to leave something as maybe not knowing about this, like this person did this. Do you mean something more about this than what seems so obvious? That the thing itself is different from the thought about it. There, and right now in listening, we can say there's a crow cawing, caw, caw, caw. But the words, there's a crow cawing, is not the immediacy of perception of caw, caw, caw. And in that immediacy of perception, there's no perceiver, there's just caw, caw, caw. One person mentioned that to me, saying, in walking I saw this orange wooden floor. I had never seen that before. That's such a moment in which words are in abeyance. Words and knowledge about wooden floors are in abeyance, and there is this thing here. Can one look at it? Or the brown mat without thinking, I know that mat. I know this floor, I've been in here many times before. That's how we usually think. We know things, and there's a certain efficiency to that. Or for a certain activity, there may be efficiency to it, for thinking. But when in the course of maybe doing a lot of sitting or being quiet, things slow down. Movements slow down, thoughts slow down. Maybe are at rest for times, periods of time, short or so. And if at such a moment the eyes and ears are open, there is something that one hasn't seen before, because it's not seen through knowledge, through thoughts, and the indifference of that. I know that. I have to look at it. We don't say those things to us, but this is how it operates. I still remember so vividly asking for someone to pass the salt shaker. And I had used it before, and this moment holding this thing in my hands, and it was an incredible little vessel, with a lot of mosaic put into it, very small mosaic, because it was a very, very small little vessel with very coarse salt in it, tiny little silver spoon. And just looking at this wasn't the salt vessel. What was this? I didn't think in those terms. I'm putting it this way for us to share here. It was not any kind of label or word that hid it, that prevents so easily from looking what we're holding in our hands or seeing the hands themselves. Have we ever looked at our hands without calling them hands or knowing what they are, taking them for granted? Not in order to find something in the wrinkles there. Just the wonder of taking a look at something freshly for the first time. Not wanting to gain insight or have the right kind of perception. That is listening with listening or looking with looking. In all simplicity and humility. Just, what is this? Very often, these revelations or these things revealing themselves come when we don't even expect it, because there is no intention there. There is no drive or ambition to attain something or do as well as somebody else has, whom one has heard or read about. That narrows and distorts our perception, and that can be seen to be so at a moment of awareness. Which comes unsolicited, unpressured. It's there. Something is there. Not the awareness is there and therefore something is seen, but the seeing is the awareness. The seeing without division, without fragmentation. Coming back to what several people report in this retreat, but I have also reported in others, the twofold thing of either feeling threatened by people or annoyed at people, critical of them for what they're doing, and the other side of it may not be the other side of it, the feeling close and unthreatened, undisturbed, by what someone else does. And a welling up of goodwill, of goodness. I don't mean will in our usual sense. Of shared goodness. Realizing one is not out to harm each other or to do one better on each other or injure each other, be bested. These frameworks are there. These are our programs. And this is what we can become aware of. Here or later, it doesn't have to be in a retreat. It can happen in humdrum daily life, suddenly realizing how one is competing with someone and therefore feeling estranged or threatened by this person or isolated from others. This insight can happen any time. But here there's lots of time and space, particularly in this retreat. We have a whole side of this room. Right now, there's no divider at all. Few people. And yet, there may be this feeling that somebody, an irritation at someone, maybe for cutting in front of one. There are two aspects of this which we talked about in different meetings. One is our competitiveness, in which we are reared. We've taken it with our milk, with our mother milk, to be competitive. In this country, it's particularly enshrined as a virtue. It's almost a religious admiration for being competitive, getting to the top that way, top of business or in sports or academically. And it's always mentioned that in competitiveness, the best is brought out in us. Something we would not achieve without a competitor, without someone racing with us. I remember this from doing foot races in school. We were pretty evenly matched. I ran faster than when somebody was very fast, much faster than I. Then I ran slower, because one became awkward in trying to have bigger and bigger steps just to catch up with this person, to be as good at it as that person. And the time showed slower rate. Whereas being evenly matched, one could run faster because once it's you and me, who will it be? The excitement, the energy of that. And of course, right now, the whole specter of Eastern countries wanting to become like the West. The thought it comes easily, while they need to be more competitive with each other, industry and people and workers. Then they will begin thriving, and it may be true, thriving economically because of competition. There are other factors, but it's one. But any one of us who has or is engaged in competing at the workplace, at home, among the siblings, or husband-wife, man-woman competition, anyone who is engaged in this and begins to observe it in a more detached way, which means intelligently looking at what it does, will find that it brings with it isolation from each other. Isolation and separation from each other, and a certain paranoia. He or she is out to be better than me or to do me in. And how can we be friends when we're competing with each other. It's impossible, isn't it? And yet the competition, the competitive drive is so deeply programmed in us. It's amazing how deep. It starts so early in our life. Children among each other, siblings. And the school fosters it. Very few schools that don't give grades. And it takes a while. My husband, who used to be a school teacher, experimented with that. It took almost the whole year before the children let up for their demand for a grade. They wanted to know how they're doing in terms of the grade, not in terms of understanding math or reading, but in terms of what number was on there in comparison to other kids. But after patiently sticking with us, even under criticism from other teachers and of course the principal, I don't know how it was possible. I don't remember that. I think he didn't do it openly. It wasn't known. Only finally it came crashing down when the principal discovered that he was doing it. But eventually something changed in the kids. They let go of that. He says there was a totally different atmosphere in the classroom. Also, he didn't make himself the center of the room. He sat someplace in the back, and of course in the beginning everybody looked back while saying something. So it may take a while, something that has been developing and thickening in our system physiologically, and because there are now theory out that is not just individually, but we have a field of that. We participate in a field of competition, a field beyond the individual, which conditions that, reinforces it, or we resonate with that general competition. And that is very difficult to extricate oneself from it. And it isn't even that. It isn't even the intention to extricate oneself. One has to see it time and time again. Always under new angles under which it appears, competitiveness. See it, observe it, see the consequences of it. The isolation, the paranoia about other people, the ill will toward each other, the anxiety, the restlessness of it. Or when one is on top, enjoying the fruits of it, the pleasure of it. And then, of course, having to guard that spot, lest somebody else would usurp it. And observing it and seeing it directly, intelligently, out of having no idea of doing away with it, but trying to understand it deeply, profoundly. Out of such seeing comes a dismantling of this program. It happens. Something comes up and it's seen, and one doesn't go with it anymore because one understands what it does. If one doesn't see it, one goes with it, and it does its thing of isolating and separating and creating suspicion or fear of the others, who become threats. Threats or baits to outdo them. And with this work of looking and understanding more, there is really a growing affection for human beings. As one begins to understand all the mechanisms in oneself. And there's a freeing from that. With that comes an affection for others, which is not put on. It's not a program, it's a very natural thing. One person said, and that is not one person's, it's said very often. You know, as I feel getting closer to people, I've noticed I don't want that. I'm afraid of that closeness. And maybe that's why I feel critical of people. Then I don't have to be close. What we just want to look at for a moment here is, what is this fear of closeness to each other? Because it happens so frequently that it's such a common thing. Wanting to be close and then afraid of the closeness when it begins to happen. And withdrawing or creating distance through some mechanism. Being critical of the person or whatever. Just withdrawing. What is this fear of being close to each other? Which goes with a yearning for closeness. One can bring up many explanations from our early life. The pains, the sorrow, suffered at being rejected, abandoned, pushed away, made feel inferior or unworthy of mother's affection, or maybe mother had no affection. One yearned for it, but it wasn't there. Or father, or siblings. May have to do with that, having been hurt too many times by wanting closeness, and maybe coming close to closeness and then being pushed away. Stroked for a moment and then the climate changed. And the hurt of that, and not under any circumstances wanting to experience that hurt again. Rather not be close, than almost be close or have a bit of it, and then have to do without it. Is that it? It is something we're questioning and wondering and leave open. Because each one of us has to find this when it happens. When the fear of closeness and the withdrawal happens, can one look right then? Or can one test out whether one's conscious or semi or unconscious assumptions about closeness are correct, are accurate today, this moment, with this person or these people? One may go on false assumption, which may have held true way in the past, but don't hold now. As a new climate, maybe, a new person. And one may withstand rejection. If one doesn't immediately call it rejection, but looks openly, vulnerably at what's happening. Not only in oneself, but in the other person or in the people. What one calls rejection may not be rejection. Who knows? One has to look with open eyes. Not just from the me point of view. That distorts, that is programmed. that knows and feels. But can there be a different looking, a fresh looking, at the risk of being hurt, but one can also look at the hurt and find out something new about hurt? It's not what one thinks it is. It can be felt and it can go. It does not have to interfere tomorrow or the next moment. Maybe I can meet that person again who has hurt me, or who I think hurt me intentionally or thoughtlessly. If I drop it, or if it drops here, there's no I that drops it. It drops when the I is quiet, not demanding or fearing. Just the openness of looking, listening, feeling, touching. We will end here for today.